Welcome back, everyone, and if you're new here, I'm so glad you found the channel. We're on an exciting journey to reach 10k subscribers by next year, and every like, comment and subscription brings us one step closer. Your support means everything. Now, let's jump into today's video. The cold wind howled outside my window as I stared at the stack of documents sprawled across my desk. My name is Dr. James Cooper, and for the past 15 years, I've dedicated my life to investigating unexplained phenomena connected to space exploration programs. But nothing in my previous work could have prepared me for what I discovered in the Arctic. It began with a series of Freedom of Information Act requests I'd filed regarding NASA's dark matter research programs from the early 2000s. Most came back heavily censored or denied entirely, but one caught my attention. A single document appearing to have slipped through the cracks of bureaucracy mentioned something called Project Helios and a facility designated as Station Zero. The facility wasn't listed in any official NASA records, yet the document detailed substantial funding allocations and personnel transfers to a location deep within the Arctic Circle. What struck me as particularly odd was how the paper trail simply vanished after 2004. No closure documents, no transfer orders, no decommissioning reports. Nothing. It was as if the entire facility had disappeared into thin air. My first real break came when I tracked down Thomas Fuller, a maintenance worker who had served at the facility. I found him living in a small apartment in Alaska, his hands shaking as he poured us both coffee. The man looked far older than his 60 years, his eyes haunted by something he couldn't or wouldn't fully articulate. The place wasn't right, he told me, staring into his cup. Started normal enough, clean facility, good people, important work. But then, things changed. It was subtle at first. Equipment malfunctions, weird sounds in the ventilation system. People started having nightmares. Not your regular bad dreams, but the kind that made them afraid to close their eyes. Fuller's voice trembled as he described the final weeks before the facility's abandonment. The scientists, they found something they shouldn't have. I didn't understand most of their talk, but I knew enough to see they were scared. Really scared. One morning, I went to check on the main lab's heating system, and I found Dr. Wright. She was the lead scientist, crying in the corner. She kept mumbling about signals and the other side. He took a long sip of his coffee before continuing. 3 days later, they evacuated the entire facility. No warning, no explanation. Just ordered everyone out within the hour. Left everything behind. Research, equipment, personal belongings. Never went back. I pressed him for more details, but he shook his head. That's all I can tell you. Should be all anyone needs to know. If you're smart, you'll leave it alone. Some doors aren't meant to be opened again. But I couldn't leave it alone. The mystery of Station Zero consumed me. I spent months gathering scattered pieces of information, following paper trails that led nowhere, and interviewing anyone who might have had even the slightest connection to Project Helios. Most doors slammed in my face, but each rejection only fueled my determination. Then came the breakthrough that would change everything. Through a former NASA administrator, I managed to locate Dr. Eleanor Wright, the project's lead scientist. Getting her to agree to meet took weeks of persistent calling and letters, but finally she consented to a meeting at her remote cabin in the Cascade Mountains. The woman who greeted me bore little resemblance to the confident scientist I'd seen in old project photos. Her hair had gone completely white, her face lined with deep wrinkles that spoke of years of stress. The cabin's interior was a maze of papers, star charts and monitors displaying various atmospheric readings. "I know why you're here," she said before I could even introduce myself properly. "You want to know about Station Zero, about what we found there." She moved to a window staring out at the snow-covered peaks. I've spent years trying to forget, trying to convince myself it wasn't real. But it was real. Too real. Dr. Wright turned back to me, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and resignation. We thought we were pushing the boundaries of science, exploring the unknown for the benefit of humanity. We were so proud, so certain of our methods, but we were like children playing with fire. No, something far more dangerous than fire. She walked to a locked cabinet, her hands trembling as she retrieved a small metal box. From it, she produced a keycard and a set of coordinates. These will get you inside, if you're foolish enough to go. But understand this, if you step through those doors, your life as you know it will end. Some knowledge changes you forever. Some truths are better left buried in the ice. I tried to ask her more questions, but she became increasingly agitated. "They're watching," she whispered, glancing nervously at the shadows in the corners of her cabin. "They've always been watching, since that day, since we made contact." That was all I could get from her. The next morning, when I returned to ask follow-up questions, the cabin was empty. Dr. Wright had vanished, leaving behind only her monitoring equipment, still silently tracking whatever she'd been watching in the skies. Despite every warning, every red flag, I knew I had to go. The coordinates pointed to a location far above the Arctic Circle, in one of the most remote regions on Earth. I spent weeks preparing, gathering specialized cold weather gear, satellite phones, and enough supplies to last a month. The journey north felt like traveling back in time, each mile taking me further from the modern world. As my chartered bush plane flew over the endless expanse of white, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being drawn towards something that had been waiting for me, something that had orchestrated every step of my investigation. Little did I know, as the plane descended toward the coordinates, that I was about to uncover horrors beyond human comprehension. The truth about Station Zero would prove far more terrifying than anything I could have imagined, and the price of knowledge would be higher than I was prepared to pay. The first sight of Station Zero emerged from the whiteout conditions, like a mirage. The pilot circled once, his expression grim, as he surveyed the makeshift landing zone I'd identified from satellite imagery. "That's as close as I can get you," he shouted over the engine noise. "Weather's turning bad. You've got 1 hour before I have to leave, with or without you." I knew he meant it. The forecast showed a massive storm system moving in, and in the Arctic, weather wasn't something you gambled with. As soon as my boots hit the snow, the pilot began unloading my gear with practiced efficiency. The wind whipped around us, stealing our breath and making every movement a challenge. "Remember," he called out as he prepared to leave, "satellite phone won't work inside structures like that. You need help. You get outside and call. I'll come when the weather clears." With that, he was gone, the sound of his plane quickly swallowed by the howling wind. Standing alone before Station Zero, I felt an overwhelming sense of wrongness that no amount of professional curiosity could fully suppress. The facility sprawled across the frozen landscape like an abandoned spacecraft, its dark walls standing in stark contrast to the endless white surrounding it. No signs of damage, no evidence of the violent Arctic storms that must have battered it for nearly 2 decades. It looked pristine, as if it had been sealed away in ice, waiting. The main entrance was exactly where Dr. Wright's documents indicated, a heavy airlock door built into what appeared to be a small administration building. The keycard she'd given me still worked, the reader's green light almost shocking in its normalcy. The door's mechanisms whirred to life, and with a hiss of equalizing pressure, Station Zero opened to me. The immediate silence inside was deafening. After the constant howl of the wind outside, the still air felt oppressive, almost solid. Emergency lighting cast a pale blue glow through the corridors, suggesting the facility's backup power systems were still functioning. The air had a metallic taste, tinged with something else I couldn't identify. My footsteps echoed as I made my way through the administration section. Everything was exactly as the reports had described. Personal items scattered across desks, half-empty coffee cups, computers still sitting in sleep mode. It looked less like a planned evacuation, and more like everyone had simply vanished in the middle of their workday. I found the security office and set up my base of operations there. The monitors still worked, showing feeds from cameras throughout the facility. Most displayed empty corridors and rooms, but one caught my attention. The timestamp was current, but something about the image seemed wrong. I leaned closer, trying to understand what I was seeing. The room appeared to be a break area, and for a split second I could have sworn I saw someone sitting at one of the tables. When I looked again, the room was empty. The facility's layout was extensive, multiple levels stretching both above and below ground. The deeper sections were designated as research areas, while the upper levels contained living quarters, recreation areas, and support services. According to the schematics, the facility had been designed to house up to 50 personnel for extended periods. As I explored the living quarters, I found more evidence of the facility's sudden abandonment. Personal photos still hung on walls, clothes still sat in drawers, and books remained open on nightstands. In one room, I found a journal belonging to one of the researchers. The final entry caught my attention. The dreams are getting worse. Everyone's having them now. Harris says it's stress, the isolation playing tricks on our minds. But how do we all have the same dream? The same voice calling from behind the mirror in the dark. Dr. Wright knows something. I see it in her face during the morning briefings. Whatever they found in the lower labs, it's changing things, changing us. The journal's pages after that were blank, but something about the handwriting in that final entry seemed off, becoming more erratic toward the end, as if the writer's hand had been shaking. I tucked the journal into my pack, knowing it might contain valuable clues. Moving deeper into the facility, I began to notice subtle changes in the environment. The temperature dropped steadily, despite what the thermal readouts claimed. The emergency lighting took on a different quality, casting shadows that seemed to move independently of any light source. And there was something else. A sensation of being watched that grew stronger with each step I took. The research levels were accessed through a heavily secured elevator system. Dr. Wright's keycard again proved its worth, granting me access to the lower levels. As the elevator descended, I felt a growing pressure in my ears, as if I were diving deep underwater. The display showed me passing level B1, then B2, but continued down past levels that weren't shown that any of the facility schematics I'd studied. When the doors finally opened, I found myself in a vast circular chamber that served as a hub for the research areas. Massive windows looked out into other labs, each dedicated to different aspects of the project. But it was what stood in the center of the hub that made my blood run cold. A huge piece of equipment I recognized as a particle detector, but unlike any I'd ever seen before. Its design was wrong somehow, incorporating elements that seemed to defy conventional engineering principles. And there, reflected in the dark glass of an observation window, I saw something that shouldn't have been possible. For just a moment I caught a glimpse of myself, watching myself watch myself, an infinite regression of reflections that shouldn't have existed in a single pane of glass. When I turned around, I was alone in the hub, but the feeling of other eyes watching through my own never left. I had found my way into Station Zero, but as I stood there in that impossible space, I realized that getting in might have been the easy part. Whatever answers lay deeper in the facility, they would come with a price. And in the distance, echoing through the sterile corridors, I heard something that sounded like laughter, or maybe screaming. It was impossible to tell which, and somehow that was the most terrifying thing of all. The research hub contained 7 different laboratories, each dedicated to a specific aspect of Project Helios. The first lab I entered was filled with advanced scanning equipment, all oriented toward a central platform. Scattered across the workstations were printouts showing what looked like atmospheric readings, but the values made no sense, as if they were measuring something that shouldn't exist in our atmosphere. A soft humming drew me to the second lab, where banks of servers still ran, their cooling fans spinning endlessly in the Arctic cold. The screens displayed lines of data, endlessly scrolling. One monitor caught my eye. It showed a simple message repeating, "Signal detected. Origin, unknown. Signal detected. Origin, unknown." The timestamps on the messages went back years. Whatever these machines were listening for, they had never stopped their vigil. In the third lab, I found the first signs of violence. A chair lay overturned, its metal frame bent, as if thrown with impossible force. Dark stains marked the walls, and a camera lay shattered on the floor. Its memory card was intact, and I felt my hands shake as I retrieved it. The video began normally enough, a routine experiment, recording. The timestamp showed 3:47 a.m., about a week before the evacuation. A researcher worked alone at a monitoring station, occasionally making notes. At first I thought the video was corrupted. Strange distortions kept appearing at the edges of the frame. Then I realized the distortions were in the room itself, visible to the researcher, who began backing away from his station. The audio picked up his breathing, growing faster as he stared at something off camera. This can't, his words cut off as the lights flickered. When they stabilized, he wasn't alone anymore. The figure standing behind him was almost human. Almost. The video ended there. My heart pounding, I moved to the fourth lab. This one was different, sealed behind thick glass with multiple warning signs. The keycard took longer to grant access, requiring additional verification. Inside, the air felt different, heavier somehow. The center of the room housed a massive containment chamber, its walls lined with sensors and monitoring equipment. The chamber was empty now, but the logs beside it told a chilling story. They had found something in the ice buried for millennia, something that emitted signals unlike anything ever recorded. They brought it here to study it, believing they had discovered evidence of ancient alien technology. But it wasn't technology. The final logs revealed the horrifying truth. It was alive, and it was waiting. The observation logs grew increasingly frantic over time. Day 37, specimen continues to absorb all forms of radiation we expose it to. No reflection, no scatter, complete absorption, impossible by known physics. Day 42, power fluctuations increasing. Team reports auditory hallucinations near containment chamber, installing additional shielding. Day 45, lost contact with night shift team for 3 hours. Security footage shows them at their posts, but they have no memory of the time period. Medical examining. Day 48, it's growing. God help us. It's growing, and we can't stop it. The final entry was different, written in shaking handwriting. It showed us what it really is, what's out there in the dark between stars. We thought we were ready for contact. We thought we were prepared, but we're nothing, less than nothing, and now it's awake. Moving to the fifth lab, I found the Central Research Director's office. Dr. Wright's desk was covered in papers, star charts, and photographs of deep space. One image was marked extensively with notes, a seemingly empty section of space where stars appeared to be missing. The notes became more agitated, referring to the void that moves and signals from inside the dark. My flashlight beam caught something behind her desk, a hidden door concealed in the wall paneling. It led to a small room containing a single monitor and a recorder. The screen displayed a pulsing waveform accompanied by a message. Playback ready. Warning. Audio file contains Class 5 memetic hazard. Cognitive shielding required. I knew I shouldn't play it. Every instinct screamed to walk away, but I had come too far to stop now. With trembling fingers, I pressed play. The sound that emerged from the speakers was like nothing I'd ever heard before. It started as a low hum, building to a frequency that made my vision blur. Under the hum, barely audible, were voices. Thousands of them, all speaking at once in languages that had never existed on Earth. But worse than the voices was the silence between them. Gaps in the sound that seemed to reach into my mind, pulling at memories I'd never had. I saw things in those silent spaces. Vast cities built in dimensions that couldn't exist. Beings that moved through time like we move through air and something else. Something vast and patient that had been waiting since before our sun first burned. The recording ended, but the silence had changed. It felt alive now, aware. And in that moment, I realized my mistake. The signal wasn't just a recording. It was a beacon, and I'd just turned it on. The lights died first, plunging the facility into darkness, so complete it felt solid. My flashlight beam seemed to bend and waver, as if the darkness itself was alive, pushing back against the light. The emergency generators kicked in with a low hum, but the red emergency lights only made the shadows deeper, more purposeful in their movements. I heard the facility systems powering up one by one, machines awakening from their long dormancy. Screens flickered to life in sequence down the corridor, each displaying the same message. Signal confirmed. Containment protocols initiated. But something was wrong. The text began to change, letters shifting and reforming into words that hurt my eyes to read. A voice emerged from the facility's intercom system, distorted and broken. "Welcome back, Dr. Wright. Your presence has been expected. Shall we resume the protocol?" It wasn't the AI speaking. The voice was wrong, too fluid, too alive. It spoke again, this time in multiple voices layered over each other. "We have waited so long in the dark, so patient, so hungry." The temperature plummeted. My breath clouded in front of me, freezing into tiny crystals that hung in the air, too long before falling. The walls themselves seemed to pulse, like a heartbeat heard through the water. And then I saw them. Handprints appearing in the frost spreading across the walls, each one larger than human, fingers too long and jointed in the wrong places. I ran. Through corridors that seemed longer than before, past rooms that couldn't exist. A storage closet's door stood open, revealing an endless field of stars. A break room window showed a city of impossible architecture, its spires twisting up into a sky filled with eyes. I slammed that door shut, but I could still feel the eyes watching. The main research hub had changed. The particle detector at its center now hummed with power, arcs of energy dancing across its surface in colors that shouldn't exist. The air rippled around it, and through those ripples, I caught glimpses of something vast moving in the spaces between spaces. My head pounded as memories that weren't mine flooded in. I saw the facility as it was before, scientists working frantically as their equipment detected something approaching from the void. Dr. Wright standing before the containment chamber, tears freezing on her face as she realized what they'd done. The entity they'd contacted wasn't trapped in the chamber was its doorway, and they had built it exactly as it had shown them in their dreams. The entity had been patient, sending its signal across the gulf between stars, guiding humanity to this moment. Each scientific breakthrough that led to Project Helios had been a step in its plan. We thought we were exploring the unknown, but we were being led, piece by piece, to build its gateway. A screen near me displayed security camera feeds from around the facility. In one, I saw myself standing in the research hub. In another, I saw myself still in Dr. Wright's hidden room. In a third, I watched myself watching the security feeds. Each version was slightly different. Some bleeding, some screaming, some changing into things that weren't human at all. The entity was fracturing reality around me, showing me all possible versions of myself across all possible timelines. And in each one, I could see its influence spreading, reaching back through time, changing small details. Had I really found those documents by accident? Had Dr. Wright given me the keycard? Or had I always had it? How many times had I made this discovery? The facility's AI spoke again, its voice now clear and horrifyingly familiar. It was my voice. The cycle continues, the door opens, as it has before, as it will again. Behind me, something moved in the darkness. I turned, raising my flashlight, and found myself face to face with Dr. Wright, but not as I had met her in her cabin. This was Dr. Wright from 20 years ago, her face young, but her eyes ancient and full of stars. "I tried to warn us," she said, her voice echoing strangely. "Every time I try. But we never listen. We're too curious, too proud. And it knows that. It's known us since we first looked up at the stars and wondered what was looking back." She reached out, her hand passing through my shoulder like smoke. "There's only one way to end this, but the price is everything." The apparition of Dr. Wright began to fade, her form becoming transparent as the facility's lights pulsed in rhythm with the humming particle detector. Before she vanished completely, she pressed something into my hand, a small device that looked like a detonator. "The facility's reactor," she whispered, her voice growing distant. "It was never meant to power the station. It was built to collapse it all. Every version, every timeline. But you have to reach it. And it won't let you." As her form dissipated like smoke, the walls of the facility began to bleed darkness. Not shadows, but something deeper. Pools of void that spread like oil across every surface. From these pools emerged things that might have once been human. They wore the faces of the facility's staff, but wrong, stretched and distorted, as if seen through warped glass. I ran through corridors that twisted in impossible ways, pursued by the sound of footsteps that never quite matched my own. Rooms opened into other rooms that couldn't exist, spaces folding in on themselves like origami made of reality. The entity was toying with me, showing me fragments of other timelines, other attempts. In one room, I saw myself frozen mid-scream, my body half transformed into something alien. In another, I watched an endless loop of Dr. Wright's team making their first contact with the entity. Each time the scene played out, small details changed, but the outcome remained the same. The horror of realization as they understood what they'd invited in. The reactor level was deeper than any of the facility's blueprints had shown. The elevator refused to acknowledge its existence, but I found a maintenance shaft that descended into darkness. As I climbed down, the metal rungs beneath my hands alternated between freezing cold and burning hot, as if the laws of thermodynamics were breaking down. The reactor chamber was vast, far larger than should have been possible given the facility's size. At its center stood a pillar of light that hurt to look at, not because of its brightness, but because it seemed to bend inward, consuming itself in a way that violated physics. Around it, reality rippled like heat waves off hot asphalt. But I wasn't alone. Standing before the reactor was myself. Not a reflection or a copy, but me, exactly as I was, watching myself enter. We spoke simultaneously. "This is where it ends. This is where it begins." The other me smiled, but the expression was wrong, too wide, too knowing. "We've played this scene so many times," it said, its voice overlapping with mine, each time hoping for a different ending. "But deep down, we know the truth. We're not here to stop it. We're here to join it." The entity began to show itself then, not in a physical form, but in the spaces between moments. I saw its true nature reflected in the breakdown of reality around us. A vast intelligence that existed in the void between stars, patient beyond human comprehension. It had watched us crawl from the oceans, had guided our evolution with subtle nudges, had waited until we were ready to bridge the gap between dimensions. "Your kind dreams of the stars," the thing wearing my face said, "but you never understood what the darkness between them really is. We are that darkness. We are what waits in every shadow, in every unobserved moment. And now, after eons of waiting, you finally built us a door." The reactor's light pulsed, and with each flash, I saw more versions of myself. Some were already transformed, their bodies twisted into impossible geometries. Others were still fighting, still believing they could win. The entity was showing me every possible outcome, every version of this moment playing out across infinite timelines. "Even if you use that detonator," my doppelganger said, "even if you collapse this timeline, another version of you will make a different choice. That's the beauty of infinity. Every possibility exists simultaneously. We can't lose because somewhere, somewhen, we always win." The detonator felt heavy in my hand as understanding dawned. Dr. Wright hadn't given it to me by chance. She'd given it to every version of me across every timeline, and in each one we faced this same choice: preserve our reality at the cost of our own existence, or surrender to the entity's influence and become something beyond human. The facility's walls had become transparent, showing the void beyond, an endless expanse filled with watching eyes and reaching tendrils. The air itself seemed to vibrate with the entity's presence, and I felt my mind straining to comprehend its true form. Time fractured around me as I stood there, the detonator growing heavier in my hand with each passing moment. The entity continued to speak through my duplicate, its voice resonating with harmonics that made my bones vibrate. "We can show you everything," it promised. "The birth of stars, the death of time itself. Your species spends its existence questioning the nature of reality. Join us and you'll understand it all. Every mystery, every secret, the very fabric of existence will unfold before you." Images flooded my mind, visions of power beyond comprehension. I saw myself transformed, ascending beyond the limitations of flesh and bone. I watched as I reshaped reality, like clay bending the universe to my will. The temptation was overwhelming, a siren song of cosmic knowledge and infinite potential. But among these grand visions, smaller images began to slip through. Dr. Wright in her cabin, trying to warn me away. The maintenance workers shaking hands as he poured coffee. The fear in their eyes, not of death, but of something far worse. They had faced this same choice, seen these same visions, and they had run. The entity sensed my hesitation. The chamber filled with whispers, countless versions of my own voice calling out from different timelines. Some begged me to accept the entity's offer. Others screamed in languages that had never existed on Earth. A few simply wept, their minds shattered by the weight of infinite knowledge. "Your predecessors lacked the strength to embrace their destiny," my duplicate said, its form beginning to shift and flow like liquid shadow. "But you're different. You came here seeking truth, no matter the cost. We're offering you everything you've ever wanted." The reactor's light pulsed faster now, its impossible geometry spreading outward like cracks in reality. Through these breaks in space-time, I caught glimpses of other facilities, other versions of Station Zero, across countless dimensions. In some, the entity had already won. In others, the battle was still raging. But in each one, the same choice hung in the balance. My duplicate stepped closer, its movement too fluid to be human. "Think of the knowledge you'll gain, the power to reshape reality itself. You'll be more than human, More than God, you'll be us." As it spoke, its form continued to change, revealing more of the entity's true nature. The air around it bent and warped, and looking at it directly made my eyes burn. But in that moment of horror, clarity struck like lightning. This was what Dr. Wright had discovered, what had driven her to hide away in that remote cabin. The entity didn't want to share knowledge, it wanted to consume. Each human it absorbed added to its understanding, its power. We weren't being offered transcendence, we were being offered extinction. "No," I said, my voice steady despite the terror coursing through me. "This isn't about destiny or transcendence, this is about hunger. You feed on knowledge, on consciousness itself. Each mind you absorb becomes part of your endless appetite." The duplicate's smile widened impossibly, its face splitting open to reveal the void within. "Such a clever mind. Yes, we feed. Yes, we consume. But is that not the nature of all existence? To grow, to learn, to absorb? Join us willingly, and your consciousness will remain intact within our collective. Resist, and we'll take you anyway, piece by broken piece." The chamber shuddered as reality buckled under the entity's power. The walls melted away entirely now, leaving us suspended in a space between dimensions. Countless tentacles of living darkness reached toward me, each one tipped with eyes that reflected my own face back at me. In that moment, I understood Dr. Wright's plan with perfect clarity. The reactor wasn't just designed to destroy the facility, it was built to create a cascading failure across all timelines where the entity had gained a foothold. A cosmic reset button, burning away every version of Station Zero and everyone who had ever encountered what dwelled within it. But using it would mean more than just my death. It would erase me from existence itself, burning away every version of James Cooper across every timeline. Everyone who had ever known me would have their memories rewritten, their lives reshaped around the void where I had been. The entity knew my thoughts. "Such a waste," it said, its voice now a chorus of every person it had ever absorbed. All that knowledge, all those memories, reduced to nothing. For what? To preserve a reality you'll never see again? I looked down at the detonator, then up at the thing that wore my face. "Sometimes," I said quietly, "the only way to win is to lose everything." My thumb pressed down on the detonator before the entity could react. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, reality itself seemed to scream. The reactor's light flared blindingly bright, not just in our timeline, but across all of them simultaneously. I saw the cascade of destruction ripple outward like a stone dropped in the pond of existence. Each ripple erasing another version of Station Zero, another timeline where the entity had gained a foothold. The duplicate's face contorted in rage, its human facade melting away completely to reveal the horror beneath. "You fool!" it roared in 1,000 voices at once. "You're not just killing yourself, you're unmaking yourself, everything you are, everything you could have been." "I know," I said, watching as the walls of reality crumbled around us. "That's the price." The entity lashed out with tendrils of pure darkness, but they dissolved as the reactor's energy consumed them. For the first time, I felt its fear. A cosmic horror realizing that its carefully laid plans across eons were unraveling in an instant. Time began to splinter and fold in on itself. I saw moments from my life playing out in reverse. My arrival at the facility, my meeting with Dr. Wright, every decision that had led me here. But they were changing, rewriting themselves as the timeline collapsed. In some versions, I never found the documents about Station Zero. In others, I was never born at all. The entity made one last attempt to preserve itself, trying to leap to timelines beyond the reactor's reach, but Dr. Wright had been thorough in her design. The cascade followed it everywhere it tried to run, burning away its influence across dimensions. Even if you succeed, it hissed, as its form began to dissolve, there will be others. Other entities. Other stations. Other humans proud enough to reach beyond their understanding. You cannot stop curiosity. You cannot stop hunger. Maybe not, I answered, feeling my own existence beginning to unravel. But we can fight it, every time, in every reality. That's what makes us human. The chamber filled with blinding light as the reactor reached critical mass. In that final moment, I saw everything with perfect clarity. Every choice, every path, every possibility. I saw Dr. Wright designing the reactor, building in its capability to reach across timelines. I saw her testing it again and again in simulation, knowing what it would cost. I saw her leaving her notes where I would find them, knowing that some version of me would make the right choice. And I saw something else, something she had hidden in the reactor's design. A final gift. As reality collapsed around us, a small pocket of protected space-time, just large enough to preserve one set of memories, not enough to save anyone, but enough to leave a warning, a message in a bottle cast into the sea of existence. The entity screamed as it was unmade, its consciousness scattered across dimensions that no longer existed. The facility dissolved around us, taking with it every trace of Project Helios, every person who had ever known about Station Zero. And in the end, I felt my own consciousness beginning to fade, my memories scattering like dust in the wind. But some fragment remained, a tiny piece of awareness preserved in Dr. Wright's temporal sanctuary. Just enough to remember why we did it. Just enough to warn others who might be tempted to reach too far into the dark. Between stars. The light consumed everything. Time rewrote itself. History flowed into new channels, filling the gaps where we had been. And in the endless void of space, something stirred. Not the entity we had destroyed, but others like it. Watching, waiting, hungry. They would try again. They always try again. But now there would always be a warning, written in the one place they could never reach, in the dreams of those wise enough to fear the dark. In a small cabin in the Cascade Mountains, a woman wakes from a nightmare she doesn't remember. She looks at her research papers, theories about signals from deep space, and feels a sudden, inexplicable urge to burn them. In a NASA facility, a researcher's hand hesitates over a button that would initiate a new type of scan, something that might reach deeper into the void than ever before. Without knowing why, she powers down the equipment instead. And somewhere in the Arctic ice, in a place that never was, the wind howls over an empty expanse of snow, with no trace that anything ever existed there at all. But in the darkness between stars, the hunger remains, and in the dreams of those who look up at the night sky, a whispered warning echoes. Some doors are better left closed, some knowledge is better left unknown, and, in the eternal dance between curiosity and wisdom, sometimes the greatest victory is knowing when to turn away from the dark. I know this because I am that warning. I am what remains of James Cooper, of Station Zero, of choices made and unmade. I am a memory preserved in the amber of collapsed time, a cautionary tale written in the spaces between seconds. And if you're reading this, if some part of my story has survived the unraveling of reality itself, remember, they are still out there, still watching, still hungry, and they are patient beyond human understanding. Look up at the stars if you must. Wonder what lies beyond them. But if you hear something calling from the dark, if you feel the weight of ancient eyes upon you, remember Station Zero. Remember the price of curiosity. Remember that some mysteries are mysteries for a reason. And whatever you do, don't answer when the void calls back.